Hello everyone and welcome to week 4 of our Impact Festival. The theme for this week is connecting people with places and each other. The aim of our festival is to create a space to meet, explore ideas, learn new skills and build a shared sense of what we want to achieve in homelessness over these coming months and years. I'm Hannah Green, I'm the Lived Experiences Specialist here at the Centre for Homelessness Impact and I'm your host for today. I'm very excited for this session. I'm joined by Terence Lester, who is a minister, speaker, community activist, author, and the founder of Love Beyond Walls, which is a not-for-profit organisation focused on poverty awareness and community mobilisation. Their most recent campaign, Love Sinks In, is bringing portable hand washing stations to the most high-traffic homeless areas across America, and so far they've reached an amazing 21 states. Terence's campaigns have been featured in USA Today, Black Enterprise, and have been viewed by millions of people globally. He's delivered countless sermons and speeches at conferences, churches and schools, and has been featured in publications across the country. He's also received numerous awards for his community activism. We're also joined by Brandy Warner, who is a freelance content writer. She writes mostly about the issues of faith and is the founder of A Good Conversation Dinner, which is a table ministry designed to help diverse groups of people connect over commonalities and celebrate differences. She's also very active in serving her local homelessness community. Before I hand over to Terence, please do make use of the chat box, introduce yourselves, and if you have any questions for Terence or Brandy, please drop them in the Q&A box and we'll answer them later on in the session. Finally, please do join in the conversation on Twitter. We have a hashtag. It is hashtag CHIFest2020. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Terence. And first of all, thank you, Terence, so much for joining us.
Awesome. Hannah, thank you so much for extending the opportunity to join you all for Impact. I want to start off by sharing a little bit about how I got introduced into the work of homelessness. So I'll share my screen really quick. So for me, homelessness is something that has personally touched my life. It's not an issue that I actually thought I would be involved in terms of advocacy work and doing justice work. The picture on the left is me at a very young age. It's a time in my life where I had experienced homelessness firsthand for myself. I remember it vividly because about 16 and a half years old, I was standing at a local gas station here in the city of Atlanta, begging for change. This was pre-cell phone, and I was asking people who would walk by. And for, many of those conversations, people would just walk by me and not even really pay attention to me or even see me, right? But there was this young guy who walked over to me and he asked me a question. He says, "Why on earth are you outside this late? Shouldn't you be preparing for school the next day?" And my response was, I just need change. I want to use the payphone to call one of my friends because I have some issues going on. He rumbled in his pocket and he got together 50 cents and he gave it to me. I pick up the phone. Around this time, I had this car that looks like this. It was an older car and I didn't have that much gas money in it. Everything I own and possess was literally in this trunk. The trunk of my car. So if you would imagine me literally waking up, no matter where I slept, having to get dressed out of the trunk of my car and then drive myself to high school to find the strength to sit in class to listen to educators talk about algebra or English, etc. So I pick up the payphone, and on the other end of the phone, my friend Eric answers, and I ask him, I say, Eric, do you mind if I could literally come over to your house to get a meal? Do you think your parents would mind? Because I'm going to sleep in a park again tonight. Eric puts down the phone, and I could hear his footsteps literally running across the floor. And before he put down the phone, I could hear the hesitation in his voice because it is a school night and we are teenagers. And now he has to ask his parents if I'm able to come over to his house. Eric comes back to the phone, and he picks up the phone and he says, "Man, come on over. My parents love you." These were his parents, Mr. Moore to the left and Miss Moore to the right. And I remember the long drive over Eric's house. I don't even remember, all of the thoughts that were rushing through my mind, but all I remember are the raw emotions that I felt. The emotions of shame, the emotions of hurt, the emotions of feeling like no one saw me. And I remember pulling up, and Mr. Moore came down the driveway. It's about 10 p.m. at night, and he walks over to the car. And in my context here in America, as a young Black man in this country, facing systemic oppression, also facing stereotypes and all of the statistics that surround young African American men in this country, Mr. Moore tells me to look at him, and I turn and I look at him. And the reason why I say all of that is because Mr. Moore was one of the first men at 17 years old that I could look at in the eyes. I had been living off and on the streets and parks, from friend's house to friend's house, not really finding a place where I felt seen and accepted. And he tells me in my face, he says, "Young man, if you don't remember anything else, I want you to remember that one day you will be a leader." Mr. Moore did something for me that I think is very appropriate in how we move forward with how we see the issue of poverty. Mr. Moore created a place of home, and home is not necessarily a place where you have a roof all the time. Home is not a place that's only defined for shelter. Home is a place where you feel safe, accepted, and seen. And if we were to use this definition in the context of talking about homelessness, do people actually living on the streets feel seen, feel safe, and do they feel accepted? Because before we talk about the issue of shelter and not having a place for people to actually go, we have to deal with the issue of how people are seen. And that's how Mr. Moore saw me. He saw me as someone that he could accept. He saw me as someone that was worthy of being seen. And he also saw me as someone that belonged to the community. Mr. Moore knew something that I think is appropriate for our conversation today, that proximity changes things. I'm not talking about the type of proximity where we walk past people and we kind of see them, but yet they're still invisible. I'm not talking about the type of proximity where we're just in close proximity just because there's no more room around us where we can't spread out. I'm talking about the type of proximity where we literally know people for who they are. We know their stories. We know their names. We know them at the very core of who they are as people. And Mr. Moore did something for me that teachers didn't even do in my high school. See, teachers remain distant and people in the community remain distant when I was living on the streets because they had this false perception of who I was. But Mr. Moore took time to get close. You see, proximity changes things. Proximity opens the door for real conversation. Proximity opens the door for us to understand people's stories and how they actually got and arrived in the situations that they're in. Proximity gives us the type of information needed for us to really understand the complexities of the issues of homelessness. Because what happens oftentimes is when we don't have proximity, Distance creates judgment. Distance creates a lack of understanding, and distance creates apathy. See, without proximity, there can be no empathy. Without proximity, there can be no compassion. And see, I think what Mr. Moore knew and understood that we all need to know and understand is that we all want to be seen. No matter where you are in life, you want to be seen in your family, on your job, in your community, in the places that you live, work, and play. We all have this inner desire to be seen. And I'm not talking about the type of seeing where you just see somebody casually. I'm talking about seeing for who we are, seen in all of our humanity, seen in all of our worth and our essence, seen because, you know, in essence, we want to be affirmed within the intrinsic dignity that we all possess. And when you are living on the streets, a meal is nothing if you're not seen. When you're living on the streets, just some change or some money is nothing compared to being seen. See, when you look at people in their eyes and you understand who they are and where they come from, you understand that they're sisters and brothers and grandfathers and grandmothers and cousins and sons and daughters and people who are worthy of this type of dignity to be affirmed. See, I think the barriers that we have to solving the issues of homelessness are simple. First, we have the barrier of the issue of worth, right? When we really talk about worth on a global scale, most times we associate worth with what people own, where they live. What school did you go to? What do you possess? How much money in your bank account? What coffee shop do you get your coffee from? Where do you live geographically? You know, where do you come from? And we associate worth with all of these extrinsic things when worth, in essence, we all have access to worth because worth is an intrinsic thing. Every single person that is created, every single person that is alive and breathing right now has worth and value. I don't care where they come from, how much money they have in their bank account, who they are around, what geography they live in. Everybody has worth. See, I think the issue of worth is a barrier for us solving the issue of homelessness, because when you don't have those things, are you worthy? When you don't have a nice car, or you don't live in a great part of town, or you don't associate with who's considered the right people, who deems you worthy or lesser than? See, I think we have an issue of worth. And I think that we need to start seeing people for the dignity that is inherent in every single human being that is alive today. And when we start with that type of intrinsic worth and value, then when we see somebody who is living on the streets, it doesn't matter if they don't have a blanket or not, they are still worthy. It doesn't matter if they don't have identification or not, they are still worthy. Why? Because they are alive and breathing, and we need to redefine how we measure worth.
Dignity is something that stays with you for your entire lifetime. As individuals, how are we engaging one another in order to change that dialogue and be able to kind of live and thrive and be the person who you are, instead of who society claims you to be, to put you in a box in order to, only way that you're elevated is through your financial wealth, that your spiritual wealth, your family wealth, your connections to your community and your neighborhood, those things aren't taken into consideration and not valued as highly.
Or measure worth and value in our culture, like what school did you go to? Who do you associate with? What geography do you live in? Where do you work? Where do you drink your coffee? And we associate worth based upon all these extrinsic things, like all of these external things. But what happens when a person doesn't have the externals, right? Is that person less worthy? And it creates the distance that we also see sometimes that keeps people from affirming the dignity of those who deserve it.
There's something about our reaction to homelessness in this society where it's repulsive to us. And I've seen that happen not just on the street, with other homeless people, but I've seen it happen in organizations that are supposed to be serving homeless people. I've seen it happen in government offices, and I've seen it happen at agencies where when a person walks out, they're spraying, the can of Lysol and grabbing the hand sanitizer. And if you're afraid to touch a person, if you're so afraid of what is going to happen when you touch that person, you can't serve them effectively.
The process is really not to necessarily see the words they use, but for them to share their experience of what it meant to them to prepare this assignment.
The way that you see other people says a lot about what's in your heart, because everybody doesn't have a mental health issue. Everybody isn't addicted to a substance. Some people lost a loved one. Some people were put out of their homes. Some people lost their jobs. There's so many ways that you can enter into this fight, and we have to stand firm and honor the journey of the person who is experiencing this.
We just had a great time here discussing with our panel of people that helped us to understand how we can contribute to eradicating homelessness, not just in the city of Atlanta, but across this country and across this nation.
One of the first questions when you meet a person is, what do you do? And instead of changing the paradigm to be able to say, well, or ask the question, who are you?
Perception of people. We have a problem with how people are actually perceived, which creates another barrier, right? Sometimes there are laws that criminalize people. Like right now in the United States of America, there are laws where if you have a certain number of bags, you can be fined. In certain cities, like you can't share food with people experiencing homelessness without being ticketed. There are even states that have cities that have ordinances and laws right now where you can't sleep in the car, even if you have a job and you can't afford the cost of living specific to the area in which you live. There are other ordinances and laws where you can't stand in certain places. And when those laws are created, a law is created, right, to keep someone who from breaking that law, and people who are normally considered lawbreakers are quote unquote criminals, right? And so that in itself creates a negative perception of how people experiencing homelessness are actually perceived. These laws that criminalize. And then another barrier is this lack of collaboration, right? There are organizations that exist that want to exist within the context of an island. They don't share data, they don't share information, and they refuse to work together. There are many organizations out there that are great, that are actually collaborating and sharing these types of resources to help people navigate the system so they can actually take steps towards achieving self-sufficiency. One of the things in my own life that really helped me to overcome the issue of homelessness is the fact that I had viable relationships, which social relationships are at an all-time deficit when you are without housing. And also having access to education, access to healthcare, access to the types of relationships that can make those personal investments in me and encourage me until I was actually in a place where I could be self-sufficient. And also the misuse of excess is another barrier. Here in the States, there are a ton of abandoned buildings right now that are unoccupied. There are resources right now within the context of community, not just owned by privatized owners, but also owned by local government that could be repurposed and reimagined. and used in a way to actually get people the type of stable housing needed, which would be considered low access barrier housing, needed for them to have a launch pad to even pursue what we call sustainability here in the States. One of the things that I want to lift up before I actually close and start the QA is that we have got to see people beyond where they are in life. Everybody is deserving of dignity, no matter how damaged the package that carries it. So we understand Chris's story, that the first time he was exposed to drugs was at 13 years old by his own grandfather, because there are deeper stories. We understand that the thing that kept Virgil from receiving a job in his field were a pair of work boots. We understand that Daniel just needed someone to sit down with him and help him develop a resume. And now he's a chef in a state and he has his own apartment. See, I believe that we need to not only reframe the narrative, but we need to reframe the way that we engage with people experiencing homelessness. Because my thoughts and ideas is that it's relationships that causes us to tear down the walls that exist between people who are considered the haves and have-nots, but it also helps us to build bridges where there have been walls. Thank you.
Thank you, Terence. That was great to hear, and I absolutely love your passion. So I'm going to hand over to Brandy now, who's going to tell us a little bit more about herself and going to kind of respond to what you've spoken about, Terence.
Hi, guys. Yeah, thank you, Terence. I have worked with Terence in doing research together, and have been sort of an assistant to him. I'm a writer myself, and my husband and I, we live in California, and we became involved in local homeless outreach. Firstly, because we had volunteered there once with our church, and after just going one time, my husband immediately just sort of fell in love with the place, the people, and so we continued, and it sort of snowballed into us going monthly, and now, in even more than that, he's gone weekly, and obviously things have sort of shifted now in this season of COVID-19. It looks a little bit different, but it sort of evolved from going sporadically and serving food to then really having more conversations with people. And a lot of what Terence talked about was reframing that narrative. And I think that a huge part of reframing the narrative is building relationship. And Terence spoke to that too, but the idea of seeing people as people or people, regardless of their financial standing, regardless of having a job or not having a job, having a family or not having a family, having a home or not having a home. Everyone has a story, and everyone wants to be seen for their inherent dignity. And I think when we can have conversations with people that look the same way that you would have conversations with anyone that you meet while you're out and about at the store, running your errands, at your job, whatever the case may be, I think that those stories are what will open us up to understanding how to best serve people. We can't know how to best serve people until we know them as individuals. I think that we try and come up with these sort of blanket responses to how we'll care for people. But really, I mean, if you think of anyone you know, think of your best friend, you know their likes, you know their dislikes, you know what they're going through in life, as opposed to just deciding like, here's, I'll bake her a cake. Well, she doesn't like cake, right? I think that we have to see everyone as individuals with their own needs and desires. And it shouldn't be based on, well, these people are homeless, so I think a lot of people would, and maybe even myself in the beginning, was to think like, well, they should be just grateful for what they're getting, right? But that dismisses the individual, it dismisses the inherent dignity of that person. And much like we all want to be treated as individuals, so does everyone else, right? So one of the things, Terrence, that you talked about a lot was reframing the interaction that we have with the homeless. And I think one of the things that sort of kept popping into my mind when you were talking about that is, I think what holds people back, people who who maybe do see people, right? However, have these misconceptions, or they have ideas about the homeless people that they see, and misconceptions about their stories. Will you speak a little bit to some of the misconceptions that people have and how those misconceptions can be eradicated?
Yeah, that's a great question. Last year around this time, we actually launched a initiative here in the States called Dignity Museum. Dignity Museum is the first museum in the US with an actual space that represents the subject of homelessness. I actually converted a shipping container into this immersive experience, because oftentimes what is happening is that people have these perceptions, but they never get a chance to understand what those perceptions do to harm people going through this experience. Like, for instance, like I was having a conversation with an individual that said, well, you know, I'm afraid of people experiencing homelessness because they may do something to harm me. But then I asked him the question, I was like, well, who's the last person that hurt you in your life? Who's the last person that did anything criminal to you? And when he went down the laundry list of people, it was nobody who was impoverished, right? That fear can be a safety mechanism, but it also can be hurtful, right? I talked to my friend Curtis, who was holding a sign begging for money on a street corner, and he talked about how people would lock their doors and roll up their windows, and how that fear that people were possessing in that moment was actually doing damage to his self-worth. He says, man, it's hard when people lock the doors or they walk across the street and they don't see me, because they don't see me as a son, as a possible brother, as a father, as someone who has integrity and morals and values. And he says, man, there are times when I go to places, and if I'm not dressed well and if I don't have my hair cut, people will ask me to leave or even call the police on me because they fear that I might do something because of that fear, right? That fear can also be damaging on the other side. And this project that we launched gives people an opportunity to put on the shoes of what that experience is like. Instead of, having the option to walk away, they put on virtual reality glasses and someone walks up to them. They are in an abandoned house with this technology, and they are able to look around and see what it's like to be in that space. They have to pause long enough to listen to someone say, you know what I'm fearing today? I'm fearing losing my life because it's supposed to be down to 20 degrees. Or they'll say, I fear being put out of another restaurant just for asking for water. Or they say, I fear that I may catch some type of disease because I have no running water and have nowhere to wash my hands. See, it's the other side of the narrative that goes lacking often, that causes us to miss an opportunity to really, truly understand and value someone's experience of homelessness, right? These aren't just homeless people. They're someone who is experiencing this plight. And we need to stop seeing people as problems and start seeing people as going through problems. And that's the reframing that we need to have.
Yeah, and you say it that way, going through problems instead of being problems. It's reminding me of we are all in this season worldwide of experiencing life differently. For some of us, that's meant losing our employment. For some of us, that's meant going from having full-time work to now being at home with our children. All of our lives look different in some degree, right? And I was thinking about how you kept coming back to, and in your video as well, the question of, we constantly ask, like, what do you do, right? Where do you live? What coffee shops do you go to? These things that sort of define us, that have now, to some degree, been stripped away from all of us. And I find myself wondering about when all of those things are taken away, like, who are we? And how that is really what someone who is struggling with homelessness, like they are struggling with to a large degree, right? That idea of identity and who am I? Because people don't see me, I'm not seen, I don't have employment, all of those things that we typically use as markers for who we are, right? And so on a large scale, I think that if we really think about it, we can start to tap into that thing that might give us a higher level of empathy for someone struggling with homelessness. Obviously, it's a lot different, but there are things that are have been stripped away from us. How do you think that might play a part in how people are perceiving someone struggling with homelessness?
Yeah, those are such great points, and I love your logic around connecting our own personal struggles and using that as a catalyst or a vehicle to actually build empathy in the way that we see other people. I think Martin Luther King's ideas of having a global village and how we are all interconnected plays a huge role in my personal approach to how we advocate for this issue. I will say this. We've heard this word used all across the media, and that is social distancing. I hate that word. And I hate that term because social distancing actually speaks to social isolation, right? What we've been doing is physically distancing ourselves from one another. And there are two distinctions. We're staying physically distant to, protect ourselves against the contraction and spread of COVID-19, specifically here in the States and all around the world, right? But people experiencing homelessness have been dealing with social distancing long before COVID-19. There have been laws that have criminalized individuals where people have distanced themselves. The way that people are perceived when they're experiencing homelessness has caused that social distance, right? People are perceived as lazy, as criminal, as uneducated, as having character flaws, as having some type of moral issues, right? And that causes social distancing. And what we've seen among people experiencing homelessness through COVID-19 is how that has actually compounded on the already existing social distancing that they've been experiencing long before people start physically distancing themselves. Like, Roman, who would say, man, nobody has given us any type of social connections or even access to testing. Or Daniel, who says, man, when places closed, not only didn't I have access to running water, but I don't even know of any safe places I can actually go to be seen, right? Or, I was relying on commuters who were going back and forth to work because I have viable relationships within that community, but now I don't even have the commuter relationship, and I feel alone and isolated. And so this is a much larger issue that we've got to grapple with in terms of how we engage people socially, right? How do we, reframe even our logic about us helping people? Because it's not always about helping people. It's about being present with people. And people miss that, right? When you're going through your worst time in your life, you want people present with you. When you've had something to happen all of a sudden, you want people with you. When you don't know how to make your next best decision because something has interrupted your life, namely COVID, you want people with you. And I think we've missed an opportunity, even here within the United States of America, to be with people who are marginalized, who are vulnerable, and who are going through these plights every single second. I was displeased and even disgusted at the lack of response that we gave people who were actually going through COVID-19 with nowhere to shelter in place, with nowhere to wash their hands, with nowhere to safely sanitize themselves and protect themselves against the spread and contraction of COVID-19. And as I've said it before, how you see people and how you engage with people and how you are present with people says a lot about what's in your heart. And it also says a lot about who you deem included and who you want to exclude, right? And I think we also have to deal with that.
Yeah, I think that's what you're saying is, not only are we not seeing people to, we're barely scratching the surface, I think, with people. I mean, I think that Love Beyond Walls right now is obviously doing a phenomenal job providing sinks, and with the Love Sinks In campaign, and seeing people's physical needs, right? I think that what you're saying is there's a starting point, and the starting point can often be meeting the physical need, but we have to go so far beyond that with people. I think about one of the ways that my husband and I have served our community is by, providing socks and shoes. And those things are wonderful and needed. But if we didn't go the step further and have those conversations with people, we also would be stuck in this mindset of, we are different. I'm here to serve you. I have something to offer you, and you don't have anything to offer me. And I think that when we get in that sort of a dynamic, that it again puts the person who is being served in a subservient, not equal, inferior place, as opposed to, again, forming relationships. I think of a man who I met about, maybe 2 months ago in the middle of this quarantine, right? And I was headed to the local kind of grocery store, and I noticed this man who looked to be struggling with homelessness in a parking lot there. And I didn't say anything to him the first time. And then when I came back the next time, I noticed he was still there in the parking lot. I noticed that a couple of times. I noticed he had a suitcase with him. I noticed he had a pile of books. And I mention all that to say, there was a seeing that happened. And when I say seeing, I see this man, right? But also, what do I see about him that I can use as a possible entry point with him? I see that he has books there, right? And I love to read. So one of my first conversations with him is, hey, like, what are you reading, sir? And he explains to me the book that he's reading. And then the next time I come, I just decide, you know what, like, how can I keep this conversation going with him? How can I figure out who he is as an individual? Like, I'm not going to jump right into like, tell me your story. He doesn't know me, just like anyone else, right? Just like anyone else I might meet, it would be unfair for me to expect him to divulge everything about himself right away, right? And so I come back with some books. I'm like, hey, and I asked him his name. His name was Lee. Like, Lee, I brought over some books for you. I noticed you're an avid reader, so am I. What kind of things do you like to read? Those things that we would, like with anyone else, develop a relationship, I think is again, like, key to not only discovering people, but discovering what their real needs are. And so Terrence, that's not as much of a question as it is kind of coming back to the idea of seeing people. And I guess my question in there would be, what advice would you have for people who do want to get better at seeing folks?
Yeah, one of the actual processes that I use in my approach to the issue of homelessness is actually design thinking. It's a 5-stage process. The first step is about empathizing, right? Many times people try to enter into communities or enter into people's spaces with having no context for who they are, what their barriers are, what their challenges are, etc. It's like you actually going to a doctor and you go to the receptionist and they're already trying to prescribe you medicine without actually seeing you and getting a proper diagnosis to what it is that you actually need. And we see this across the board within the context of organizations trying to perform this saviorism type aspect of their work, going in and taking ideas of what they think people need and without actually getting to know people. Because you can never create solutions for people that you've never met, is what I'm basically saying. In this empathize phase, you're getting the chance to ask questions. You're getting the chance to actually understand the person's history, context. You're getting to understand who this person is, and also getting the chance to understand how does my life even connect to this much larger story that you're sharing with me. You're building a relationship. The second stage is defining. This process of actually defining what it is. What are the barriers? What are the challenges? What has been the challenges? Right? There is a individual that our organization was walking with that lost contact with his family. He hadn't been in contact with his family in over 30 years, right? And we did some research and was able to provide that type of unification. But if we went into this process of not really defining what the actual problem is, then we would have tried to create a solution for a problem that never existed, right? The definition phase is so important because it gives you a chance to really understand, the direct thing that we need to address. Everybody who is experiencing homelessness isn't a drug addict. Everybody doesn't have a mental health issue. Some people lost a job. Some people lost a loved one. Some people were laid off. I think people feel the close tension of that now that we're in this pandemic. Some people are fleeing domestic abuse, right? Some people were born into homelessness. It's not even something that they asked to be in. I can remember several young guys that we've had relationships with, that we actually walked with out of the experience of homelessness, that said, man, I never, my family was like this. So they were born into the context. And I think this definition phase gives you a chance to go to the next phase. Is a strategy or ideating process, thinking about, what ideas, what's in my network, who can I collaborate with, what resources are around me, who can I bring in to collaborate to give this person or this group of people the type of resources needed so they can take the next step in their steps towards sustainability. Obviously, the next step here in talking about design thinking is prototyping. It's the actual implementation, right? Or building this type of idea to even dream about what this actually work. And the next phase is the testing phase, where you actually test it out. And this phase for me is the most important, because sometimes people go through all these phases and they're doing work, right? And they give up on people, or they give up on the individual because this is taking too long. You know, we've tried this and it didn't work. And what happens is you end up just like everybody else, throwing a person away again. But change takes time. Change doesn't happen in a day, it happens daily, right? And I think people falsely think that people are supposed to be where they are overnight. Mm-hmm. And many people, don't realize how much time it actually takes to transition and to change and to be in this consistent pattern of walking with people and being present with people. There are times that you failed, but people still showed up. There are times that you didn't get it right, but people still showed up. And what I like to say is that once you start implementing, be daring and courageous enough to stick with people, because that's the type of love that we are missing.
Yeah, that's great.
So I've got
yeah.
Go on, Brandy.
No, I was actually going to ask you, Hannah, if there were any questions.
Yeah, so we've got a few for Terence, and then I've got one for both of you as well. So Terence, kind of combining two questions here. You talked about the collaboration. In terms of evidence and data, how can we apply what we learn when we're interacting with people and having conversations with people who are experiencing homelessness? How can we apply that to future interventions? And when you're working in the areas you're operating in, are you able to collaborate with local government and other organizations? And if so, what have you found the most effective?
Awesome. Well, firstly, I'll speak to the first question, and I'll use one example. So we've seen a trend here, specifically in the United States of America, of people having barriers in terms of not having identification, right? If you don't have an identification card, you can't open a bank account, you can't cash a check, you can't have access to housing. Sometimes you can't even do the normal things needed to function as a citizen of this country. With this data, there is an organization called Many City, right? Is a tech company that launched a campaign to actually expedite the process of people having access to their identification cards, at an expedient rate. Why? Because right now, if you don't have ID and you need ID to get ID, how can you get ID? That's weird. Like, you need ID or birth certificate to secure another form of ID, and you need that ID to secure this ID. But we have criminal systems that use fingerprints, right, to pull up backgrounds of everything that you've ever done wrong, right? That's just one way to apply data. We see a problem with there being faster access to having ID, and organizations like Many City has stepped up to solve this problem. What I'm basically saying is, just the issue of ID, it takes 8 months to secure a birth certificate. And you have to have access to a lawyer who would petition your birth hospital on your behalf to secure those records, just so you can have access to that. But what about the slow pace and all that stuff? And we've worked with several people where it's taken 8 months just to get one piece of identification. And so when we're thinking about solving problems, there are creative ways in which we can literally look at the data and come up with strategies that are at our disposal to solve some of these issues. Yes, we have worked with identification recovery organizations that specialize in reunification, organizations that are working with drug and substance and alcohol abuse, organizations that offer free counseling, organizations that help us get access for people to housing. It's a little nuanced though in the United States of America, because it's all about who holds, public office and who is, legislating laws and who is for, these sorts of things. It's really strange here in our country because, we see a lot of misuse of power in terms of politics and the misuse of who gets access and who doesn't, right? And so organizations find, it very challenging on the ground doing these grass work type of projects to gain support sometimes. It just depends on who you are able to align with politically, et cetera. And oftentimes, even when local government and political leaders align with you, is the agenda of that leader even align with the actual authentic mission of the organization? I think as any type of leader, you have to be very smart and in the ways in which you collaborate with all stakeholders, but keeping your main mission before you. At the end of the day, the win for us is to see more people sustainable.
And then the next one is, it's a question I get asked a lot, so I thought I would put it to you. What motivated you to kind of publicly share your experiences of homelessness, and how has that influenced and shaped your work and the rest of your life?
I didn't hear the first part. Could you?
So what motivated you to publicly share your experiences of homelessness?
Yeah, I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started seeing myself as a person that is empowered through my personal experiences with homelessness. And I also realized that I had something to offer. The issue that many people have with people experiencing homelessness is that not only do they see them as criminal, but they don't realize that they too have something to offer, right? There are often times when we're walking with people who have, business degrees and all sorts of educations, or have certain skills and talents. I remember us, walking with this individual who had a knack for art and carpentry, and that became a vehicle for him to recover work, And I think, sometimes we miss the fact that people have something to offer. For me, I realized that because I had voices of individuals who saw me for who I was, encouraging me and calling that out in my life. And, I got to this place where, I've read this quote somewhere that says, sometimes your greatest pain could lead you to your greatest passion. And that is also true for me. This is not something that is something I'm doing for a hobby. This is my life's work, because service for me doesn't happen in an event. It happens as a lifestyle, and that's the way I'm living my life.
And this question's for both of you. So what one thing can we take away from today, so that when we're having conversations with anyone really, we can start to do some of that work to reframe the narrative around homelessness?
Yeah, I'll go first. For me, it's deconstructing the false generalizations that all people experiencing homelessness are one way. If I didn't own a truck, you wouldn't call me truckless, right? You wouldn't label me and use that label to limit me, et cetera. And I think the way that we talk about people experiencing poverty has to change. First of all, it takes courage to be poor in this world. It takes courage to experience homelessness and get up every single day and live. And when we start seeing people as courageous going through these experiences, we have a different level of appreciation for people suffering, because why? We also have suffered. We are part of this fabric of human suffering that none of us can escape. And just the way that we talk about individuals going through suffering, we need to talk about it from a more empathetic and personable way.
Yeah, I would say something similar. I would just, the word that comes back to mind is conversation. I think we have to have conversations with people. I think that is across the board. And when I think in terms of political opinions, when I think of the ways that we can separate ourselves and yet have very strong opinions about people that we don't know individually, right? All you have to do is pull up your Facebook page or your Instagram or your Twitter to have that person in your family or that person who you know doesn't necessarily, has never even had a conversation with a person who feels that way in real life, yet has formed an idea of what this person who believes this way, or this person who politically might stand in a different place than you, that you automatically form opinions about that person without ever entering into a real conversation. And so I would say the same about people struggling with homelessness, that it is up to us to have a conversation with that person that maybe we are running into on a regular basis, that is always outside of the coffee shop that we go to, that is always sitting outside of the post office, whatever it may be. The best way to break any misconception about anyone is to know the truth. And the only way to really know the truth about that person is to have a real in-person conversation. And I think it's going to take like Terrence said, this person is courageous to be living day to day and facing the challenges that they're facing. It's up to us to be courageous in taking that first step of having a conversation that's going to help us see people the way that they actually are, as opposed to our stereotypes about them.
We're coming to the end now, so I've got one final question for Terrence. What's next, Terrence, for Love Beyond Walls and Love Sinks In? Where do you kind of imagine this going?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I am very passionate in right now is education around the subject of homelessness. I don't think that this is an issue that we talk about enough of. Poverty is one of the roots of homelessness, right? Poverty creates lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to shelter, lack of access to good education, right? And so I think there needs to be more language around these narratives that persist and have persisted about this group of individuals. I too was once a person that experienced homelessness, right? If you were to look up resources right now in terms of just education materials, there's not a great amount. And so I'm hopeful to see Love Beyond Walls continue to build more empathy in terms of education and how we talk about these narratives. I call it narrative justice. What does it look like to challenge some of the dominant narratives that have persisted about people who've been impoverished, not just nationally here in the States, but also globally? How do we change those narratives where we push those aside so we can see the humanity of individuals who've been overlooked for so long?
Thank you. Thank you both very much for joining us today. That's definitely given me and everybody else that's watching a lot to think about. Please do carry on the conversation on Twitter. We have a hashtag, it's CHIFest2020. And if you head over to our website, you can sign up for the rest of this week's events, along with catching up with all the previous sessions. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You.